Victorian bedchamber. Midnight. Rain tapping against tall windows. Candlelight flickering against the walls like something alive. Her gloved fingers slowly removed one glove, the left one, and placed it on the dresser with the deliberate care of a woman who is thinking about something else entirely. He stood behind her, not touching, not moving. The kind of stillness that is not calm, but its opposite. A man holding himself in place by sheer and considerable effort, while every instinct he possessed pointed in one direction. She turned slightly. Their eyes met in the mirror. "You should not be here," Alistair said. Low, restrained. The voice of a man who has said the correct thing too many times to believe it anymore. She stepped closer. "Then why did you lock the door?" Evelina said. He almost reached for her. His hand lifted an inch from his side. 1 inch, one moment of honest movement, before he stopped it. Pressed it flat. Made it obedient again. Thunder rolled faintly outside. The candle between them bent sideways in a draft and straightened. "It will only be tonight," she said, barely above a whisper. The words were not a seduction. They were a mercy, offered to both of them. The only version of this that the world they lived in would allow. They leaned closer, foreheads nearly touching, his breath and hers becoming the same breath in the narrow space between them. And then, from the corridor outside, footsteps. Neither of them moved. They simply went still, the stillness of people who have spent years learning how to disappear inside a room, while the footsteps passed the door and faded, and the house resumed its midnight silence. She stepped back. He let her. They stood in the rearranged distance and looked at each other and said nothing, which was the most honest conversation they had had in 3 years. It had begun, as these things often do, with an invitation that should have been declined. The Ashford Winter Gathering was the kind of event that filled the houses of the English aristocracy every December. 30 guests, a week in the country, dinners and card games and morning rides, and the particular social performance of people who have known each other too long and too shallowly. Duke Alistair Hawthorne had attended for 6 consecutive years without incident. He was considered, by the women, to be attractively reserved, by the men, to be reliably useful at cards, by himself, to be a man who had learned to occupy a room without being fully present in it. He had arrived on the Monday. He had not known, until the Tuesday evening when the Ashcroft carriage came up the drive in the early dark, that she would be there. The footman announced her, Lady Evelina Ashcroft, accompanied by her mother, Lady Harriet Ashcroft, who descended first and began talking immediately. Evelina came down the steps behind her, in dark blue, and looked at the assembled guests with the composed attention of a woman cataloging a room, and her eyes found him before he had time to arrange his face into anything appropriate. 3 years. 3 years since the last time he had been in the same room with her, and his first thought, unguarded, before composure arrived, was that she looked exactly as he remembered her, and he had spent 3 years hoping, for entirely selfish reasons, that this would not be the case. She inclined her head. He inclined his. Lady Harriet completed her sentence about the drive from Whitmore, and everyone moved inside, and that was the entirety of their first exchange since 1878. It was enough to ruin the rest of the evening. He had found out about the engagement at dinner. Not from Evelina, not from her mother, from Sir Edmund Voss, a broad, agreeable man in his 50s with an estate in the north and a great deal of confidence in the quality of his own opinions, who had leaned across the table during the soup course and said to the man on his left, just loudly enough, "Wonderful news from the Ashcrofts, I hear." Lady Evelina confirmed at last, "Young Pemberton has done well for himself." Alistair had set down his spoon. He had picked it up again. He had continued the conversation with the woman on his right about her views on the reliability of the Northern Railways, and he had performed, over the following 2 hours, the most exhausting dinner of his adult life. Evelina was engaged. To Viscount Pemberton. He knew Pemberton. They had been at school together, briefly, overlapping by 1 year. Pemberton 2 years younger, not unintelligent, with the easy social grace of a man who has never had to work for anything and therefore finds everything equally pleasant. He was not a bad man. This made it considerably worse. After dinner, when the guests dispersed to card tables and the fire, Alistair had gone to the library. He had taken a book from the shelf and not read it. He had stood at the window and watched the rain begin and understood, with the specific and helpless clarity of the welcome posed, that 3 years of careful distance had not done what he had intended it to do. He still loved her. He had always loved her. He had simply been filing it under categories that made it survivable: respect, admiration, the particular fondness of two people who had recognized something in each other at a party in the spring of 1875 and had then done the correct and socially responsible thing of not acting on it. She was not yet promised then. He was not yet desperate. There had been, briefly, a world in which the timing might have been different. The timing had not been different. He heard the library door open. He did not turn. "I wondered where you'd gone," Evelina said. "I came to read," he said. He was still holding the book. "You've been looking at the window for 20 minutes, she said. "Whatever is written there must be fascinating." He turned then. She was standing inside the door, which she had not closed behind her, which meant this was not a clandestine visit but an ordinary one. A person who has followed a friend to a library to ask why they disappeared from a party. He was not allowed to read more into it than that. "Pemberton," he said. He had not planned to say it. She went still, just slightly. The small, controlled stillness of someone who had been expecting this and prepared for it and finds, in the moment, that preparation is insufficient. "Yes," she said. "Are you?" He stopped. Began again. "Is it what you want?" She looked at him steadily. "It is what has been arranged," she said. He nodded. He put the book back on the shelf. "Then I congratulate you," he said, and his voice was entirely level, and she looked at him for a moment with an expression he could not read, something too complicated for the single glance he allowed himself before looking away. "Thank you," she said. Equally level. She left. He did not follow. But that night, at 11:30, when the house was quiet and the rain had settled into the steady rhythm that would continue until morning, there was a quiet knock at the library door, and he opened it, and she was there. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "Neither could I," he said. And that was how they ended up in the library, for 3 hours, talking the way they had talked at that party in 1875, about things that mattered and things that didn't, about the kind of ideas that the drawing room doesn't allow, and the kind of silences that happen between people who are genuinely at ease with each other. She sat on the window seat with her feet tucked underneath her, which was not remotely correct and was entirely her. He sat across the room in the reading chair and watched her talk and felt the old feeling. Not the yearning version of it, not the desperate version, but the version that is simply the recognition of someone you belong with, quiet and certain and devastating in its simplicity. They did not touch. They did not come close to touching. At 2 a.m, she stood, and he stood, and she looked at him. "Good night, Alistair," she said. "Good night, Evelina," he said. She left. He stood in the library for a long time. And somewhere between Tuesday evening and Wednesday morning, he understood that the next several days were going to be the hardest exercise in self-governance he had ever undertaken, in a life that had already contained a considerable number of them. If you were in Alistair's position, watching the person you love announced as someone else's, what would you have done? Comment your thoughts below. And if stories like this reach something inside you, subscribe, like, and share. There is more to come. He had met her in the spring of 1875 at a garden party at the Voss estate. This was worth knowing. Alistair Hawthorne, at 31, had already decided that the kind of love people wrote poems about was largely a fiction maintained by people who had not spent enough time in the same room as other people. He was not cynical by nature. He was simply a man who had observed, across 2 decades of aristocratic society, that most marriages were negotiations and most romances were performances, and he had made his peace with this understanding and decided that a man of his responsibilities could want no more than a well-chosen alliance and a tolerable companion. He had believed this completely and without reservation until the afternoon of May the 14th, 1875, when he had been standing at the edge of the Voss garden discussing crop rotation with a baronet, and a woman he had never seen before had walked past them both without looking at either of them, carrying a book and a glass of something fizzing, and the baronet had said, "Do you know Lady Evelina Ashcroft? Brilliant girl, they say," and Alistair had looked after her retreating figure and thought, "I would like to know exactly what she is thinking." He had introduced himself an hour later, near the rose beds, where she had been reading with the focused inattention of a person who is at a party because they are required to be and has found the most efficient way to be simultaneously present and elsewhere. She had looked up. She had assessed him in approximately 3 seconds with those clear, unhurried eyes. She had said, "You're Hawthorne. You have 3,000 acres in the West, and your father was a disaster with money." He had blinked. "That is accurate. Mine was too," she said. "We have that in common." She moved her skirts to make room on the bench. "Sit down. I'm tired of people standing over me." He had sat down. They had talked for 2 hours. He had gone home that evening with the settled, slightly alarmed understanding that his carefully constructed philosophy about love and marriage had been insufficient and he needed to revise it. What had followed over the next 18 months was the most disciplined and the most alive he had ever simultaneously been. They moved in overlapping social circles, inevitably, given their respective positions, and found themselves at the same dinners, the same country gatherings, the same exhibitions at the Royal Academy, where Evelina had opinions about everything and was rarely wrong. He had made no declaration. She had offered no invitation. They had built, instead, the most carefully maintained and silently understood almost something that 2 people of intelligence and self-control could construct. He had wanted to speak. Several times. He had composed sentences in the quiet of his study, declarations that were honest without being reckless, admissions that were dignified without being cold, and had arrived at each relevant moment with the sentences prepared and found. Each time, the moment not quite right. Too public. Too soon. Not yet the right context. And then the spring of 1876 had arrived, and with it the information that Alistair's estate, his father's legacy of spectacular financial decisions, was in a crisis more serious than he had previously understood. The solicitor's visit in March had made the arithmetic undeniable. The estate's debts required a substantial injection of capital within 2 years, or the house and the land and everything the name stood for would have to begin its quiet dissolution. He had made the calculations. He had looked at the options. He had understood what was required. He had not spoken to Evelina. He had written her one letter. Private, careful, honest in the way of a letter written at midnight that the writer knows they cannot send. "I would have asked you first. I want you to know that. Whatever comes next, I would have asked you first." He had not sent it. He had burned it. He had gone the following week to a dinner at which Lord Ashcroft was present and had conducted himself with complete correctness and had begun, quietly, the process of becoming a man who did not act on what he felt. For 3 years, he had been that man. The Wednesday morning at the Ashford gathering was frost on the windows and breakfast taken in the long dining room with 11 other guests and Evelina at the far end of the table, talking to her mother about something involving a cousin's house in Dorset, not looking at him. He had watched her with the practiced peripheral attention of a man who has spent years looking at something he is not supposed to be looking at, and he had thought, she is the same. Exactly the same. The intelligence behind the eyes, the way she tilts her head when she disagrees with something but has decided not to say so yet, the way she holds a teacup as though she's not particularly concerned with what anyone thinks of her grip. Lady Harriet caught him looking. He moved his attention immediately to the window. Lady Harriet said nothing, but her eyes were the kind of eyes that filed things away with perfect accuracy, and he was aware, with the cold clarity of a man who has underestimated a mother before, that this was not a woman who would overlook a duke's attention falling on her engaged daughter with that particular quality of stillness. The engagement announcement was made formally at the Thursday evening dinner. Their host, Mr. Ashford, raised a glass with the cheerful authority of a man who enjoys being the venue for good news, and said that he was delighted to share that the gathering had been graced with the occasion of celebrating Lady Evelina Ashcroft's engagement to Viscount Pemberton, which had been confirmed that very month, and that he hoped everyone would join him in wishing the young couple every happiness. 30 people raised their glasses. Alistair raised his. He looked at Evelina across the table as the toast was drunk, and she looked back at him with an expression that was entirely composed and entirely unreadable. And he drank, and she drank, and the dining room was warm and bright, and full of the pleasant noise of a house enjoying itself, and he had never been further from a room in his life. Pemberton was not present. He was at his estate in the north, apparently, some matter of management that couldn't wait, which Alistair noted said something about Pemberton's understanding of priority, and which he immediately instructed himself to stop thinking about. After dinner, in the drawing room, Lady Harriet found him near the window. "Your Grace," she said, with the warmth of a woman who deploys warmth as a precision instrument, "we are so glad you could attend this gathering." "It is a pleasure, as always," he said. She looked at him with those filing cabinet eyes. "I understand you and Evelina are acquainted from previous seasons. We have met on several occasions, yes." "She speaks well of you," Lady Harriet said. A pause. "As a mind worth consulting. She has always valued intellectual exchange." Another pause. "With appropriate company." He looked at her. She looked at him. The conversation was taking place on two levels simultaneously, and both of them knew it, which meant it was, in its way, the most direct exchange he had had all evening. "Lady Ashcroft," he said carefully. "Lady Evelina is to be congratulated. Pemberton is." "Yes," she said smoothly. "He is." A small smile. "I am sure you will be a great comfort to us all, Your Grace. Your discretion is well known." She moved away toward another group. He stood at the window and understood, with absolute clarity, that Lady Harriet Ashcroft knew exactly what was in this room, had probably known since 1875, and had just told him, in the precise and impeccable language of a Victorian mother with an engaged daughter and a duke's reputation to consider, that she expected it to remain precisely and permanently where it was. He was not angry. He was not even surprised. He was tired. For the first time, after 3 years of composure, he was simply tired. Evelina found him the following morning in the East Garden. The frost had retreated into the grass, and the morning had that particular winter clarity. Everything sharp-edged and pale, the sky the color of pewter, the bare branches of the yews perfectly still. He was walking because the house was not large enough, that morning, for him to sit in it without feeling the walls. She fell into step beside him without preamble. For a while they simply walked. Their breath made small clouds in the cold air. The gravel was loud under their feet. "My mother spoke to you last night," she said. It was not a question. She did. "What did she say?" "Nothing that was not accurate," he said. Evelyn absorbed this. "She knows," she said. "She has known for some time. She is not unkind in her intentions." I know that too, he said. They walked around the end of the yew hedge and into the part of the garden that was not visible from the house. Both of them knew this. Neither of them remarked on it. I want to ask you something, she said, and I would like you to answer honestly. I have always been honest with you. I know, she said. That is why I'm asking. She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. She looked at the bare rose beds, still, frost-edged, waiting. Are you all right? It was such a simple question. The specific, private simplicity of it. Not the social question that asks how are you and expects the social answer, but the real one. The one that only a handful of people in a life are ever actually asking. He looked at her profile, the straight line of her nose, the particular set of her jaw that meant she was bracing for something. No, he said. Not entirely. She nodded. She had known. She had asked anyway. Nor am I, she said quietly. They stood in the cold garden and the pale morning moved around them and did not offer anything useful, and they were both, in that moment, simply human, not a duke, not a lady, not an obligation or an engagement or a social consequence. Just two people in a garden in December who had arrived at an impossible situation by the most ordinary possible route, caring for each other at the wrong time. I should not have come this week, she said. You couldn't have known I would be here. No, she said, but I think some part of me hoped you would be. She said it simply, without drama, looking at the rose beds. And that is a problem. He said nothing. I am going to marry Pemberton, she said. Not because he had asked, because it needed to be said aloud, in the cold, where both of them could hear it. It has been arranged, and I have consented, and he is. He is a reasonable man. He is not unkind. I know, Alistair said. And you are going to continue to be whatever you have been for the last 3 years, she said. Correct. Distant. Precisely positioned outside the boundary. Yes, he said. She turned to look at him then. Her eyes were clear and direct, and held the thing they had both been holding for 3 years without ever setting down. I want you to know, she said, that I understand why. The estate, the debt, the timing. I have understood all of it from the beginning. I do not blame you. He held her gaze. Something in him, the part that had been composed for 3 years, the part that had written and burned letters and raised glasses at other people's toasts, and been a man of his position rather than a man of his feelings, that part cracked. Not visibly, but it cracked. I should have spoken, he said. In 1876. Before any of this. Yes, she said. You should have. Not a reproach. A fact, offered with the same honesty she had always given him. I know, he said. She turned back to the garden. He stood beside her. The morning continued around them, and neither of them said anything more, and it was the most painful and the most honest 7 minutes he had ever spent standing still. The week should have been easier to navigate than it was. The rules were clear. The constraints were established. Both of them understood the geometry of the situation with the precision of two people who are very good at understanding things they would prefer not to understand. They moved through the gathering with appropriate distance, seated apart at dinners, separated by other conversations at card evenings, careful with every glance and every word and every ordinary interaction that had to be made to look like less than it was. It was exhausting in the way of sustained intelligence, the specific drain of using your mind continuously to manage what your instincts would otherwise do. The library, again, on Friday evening, was an accident. Or more precisely, both of them arrived independently in search of a book and found the other already there. And the decision to stay or go was made in the half-second of recognition before either of them spoke. He should have left. She should have left. Neither of them left. She was looking for Dickens, something light, she said, for a sleepless night. He had been looking for Pepys, something dry and detailed and sufficiently unromantic. She found her Dickens on the second shelf. She stood at the shelf with the book in her hands, and he stood at the reading table, and the library was quiet around them and warm with the last of the fire. "Sit down," she said eventually. "You look as though you're about to be dismissed." He sat. She sat across from him, which was the wrong choice, but neither of them corrected it. "How long have you known?" he asked. He did not specify what he was asking about. He didn't need to. "Since the first winter," she said. "The party at Weston. You handed me down from the carriage and then stood entirely too correctly on the pavement for approximately 30 seconds before you remembered where you were." He looked at her. "You noticed that?" "Alistair," she said, with the quiet precision of a woman who is tired of pretending she hasn't seen the thing she has seen. "I notice everything you do. I have been noticing everything you do for 4 years. That is rather the problem." He was quiet. "And you?" she asked. "The rose beds," he said, "in the Voss garden. When you told me my father was a disaster with money." She blinked. Something moved across her face, surprise, and then something below surprise, something quieter and more dangerous. "That was the first time we met." "Yes." She looked at him with those clear, cataloging eyes, and he let her look because he was done, in this room, at this hour, managing what his face showed. "That was 4.5 years ago," she said. "Yes," he said. She was very still. The fire shifted. Outside, the wind moved through the yew trees and then was gone. "And you never—" She stopped. "I was calculating," he said. "The estate. The timing. I kept telling myself the moment wasn't right." He paused. And then the moment passed. She looked down at the Dickens in her hands. She turned it once in her fingers. "If the timing had been different," she said quietly. "If the estate had been solvent. If you had spoken before Pemberton's name was ever mentioned. I would have asked you," he said. Immediately. Without hesitation. She looked up. "I know," she said. And the knowing was in her eyes. Not comfort, not blame, but the full and clear-eyed recognition of a truth that had arrived precisely too late. He almost reached for her hand. His own hand moved, on the table, in her direction, 1 inch, 2, before he pulled it back. She watched his hand return. "Good night, Alistair," she said. She stood. "Evelina." She paused. "I'm sorry," he said. "For the timing. For the calculation. For being less brave than the situation required." She looked at him for a long moment. "I know you are," she said. "Good night." She left. He stayed in the library until the fire went cold, and did not read a single page of Pepys. The letter was not his. This was the critical thing. This was the thing that everything else would eventually hinge on. But on the morning Lady Harriet Ashcroft found it, it appeared, with devastating completeness, to be from him. It had been slipped beneath the door of the Ashcroft guest suite during the Friday night, on paper that bore the Hawthorne family crest. It was written in a hand that resembled Alistair's, close enough to his style that a woman who had never studied his correspondence could be entirely deceived. It was addressed to Evelina, and it said, in the language of restrained Victorian ardor, that the writer could not allow the engagement to proceed without telling her that his feelings were unchanged, that he would meet her in the East Garden at dawn if she chose to come, and that he remained as he had always been, hers. Lady Harriet had found it at 6 in the morning when she entered her daughter's room to check on a cough, and found Evelina already awake, sitting at the window, holding the letter with an expression that told Harriet, whose instincts had been filed to a point over 40 years of watching people, everything she needed to know about how her daughter had received it. Evelina had not gone to the East Garden. She had not known whether to believe it was from him. The writing was close, but not exact. The crest on the paper was real, but the paper could be obtained. Alistair would have said more. She knew the quality of his thought, the precision of his language. He would have said something that could not be mistaken for anyone else's phrasing. This letter was good. It was not him. She had still sat with it for 3 hours, which was the part that her mother had caught. and which told Lady Harriet everything she had half known since Tuesday evening. Lady Harriet descended to the breakfast room with the letter and the expression of a woman who has made a decision before she has fully examined whether it is the right one. She found Alistair first, before the other guests arrived, taking coffee by the window. She placed the letter on the table in front of him. She said nothing. He looked at it. He picked it up. He read it. "This is not mine," he said. "No," she said pleasantly. "Lady Ashcroft," he said, with perfect steadiness, "I did not write this letter. The crest is available to anyone who knows where to look." He set the letter down. "The hand is similar, but not identical. The phrasing is not mine. I do not write like this." He met her eyes. "I understand why you are showing it to me. I understand what it implies. I am telling you that I did not write it. My daughter has been sitting awake since before dawn holding a letter written on your family paper," she said, and the pleasantness was gone from her voice now. She was simply a mother, and she was angry. "I know," he said. "That was exactly what it was designed to do." She was quiet. "Someone sent this to damage her," he said, "and to damage me. And they chose the Ashcroft suite because they understood that you would find it and that you would respond in exactly this way. The question is who has something to gain from that." Lady Harriet looked at him with those filing cabinet eyes. She was running through the same calculation he was, the guest list, the connections, the social landscape. "Pemberton's family," she said slowly. "His aunt has been here all week." He said nothing, which was its own answer. "You should speak to Evelina," she said. Still not warm. But she picked up the letter and held it for a moment with the consideration of a woman revising her position. "If she will see me," he said. Evelina saw him in the morning room. She had dressed and come downstairs, and she was standing at the window when he entered, with the letter in her own hands this time. Her mother had returned it to her, and she looked at him with a directness that made most conversations feel like performances by comparison. "Tell me honestly," she said. "I did not write it." She looked at him. 3 seconds. "I know," she said. "You knew before I—" "The phrasing," she said. "You would not write as I have always been, hers. You would not write hers. That is not your voice." A pause. "But the paper is yours." Someone accessed the estate stationery. It was in the writing room on the first floor. "I left it unlocked." He paused. "I should not have." "Pemberton's aunt," she said. "It is possible. It is certain," she said, with a flatness that told him she had already worked through this before he arrived. "She has been watching us all week. She came to this gathering specifically. Pemberton himself couldn't come. She came instead. She looked at the letter. She wants the engagement to collapse from Evelina's side, not Pemberton's. If he ends it, the Ashcroft dowry arrangement is complicated. If I end it, if I am seen to have been conducting a correspondence with another man, my family loses standing and Pemberton's family walks away clean." He looked at her. "You have been thinking about this all morning." "Since 5 o'clock, she said. "Yes." He crossed the room. He stood in front of her, closer than was correct, but neither of them moved. She looked up at him with the letter between them, and her eyes were clear and tired and utterly unafraid. "We need to be very careful," he said. "Yes," she said. "If this becomes public." "I know what happens if it becomes public." "Then we do nothing that gives it purchase," he said. "We behave exactly as we have been behaving. You do not end the engagement." "I do not," he stopped. Rearranged. "I do not do anything that makes the story the letter tells look true." She looked at him for a long moment. "And is it true?" she asked quietly. "The sentiment, if not the letter. Is it true?" He held her gaze. "You know the answer to that," he said. "I want you to say it," she said. Not to wound him. Because she was a woman who had been managing ambiguity for 4 years and was, in this particular morning, too tired for it. "Yes," he said. "It is true." She nodded. She looked at the letter one more time. Then she folded it carefully, with the precision she brought to everything, and held it. "Then we are very careful," she said. "And we wait." "For what?" "For whatever she does next," Evelina said. Because this was not her only move. She was right. It was not the only move. By Saturday evening, the story was moving through the gathering in the particular way that stories move through houses where everyone has spent 5 days in close proximity. Not loudly, not dramatically, just in the slight change of temperature when Evelina entered a room, in the glances that followed her, in the careful warmth of women who age. Not having heard it, Evelina bore it with the specific, armored grace of a woman who has been underestimated since childhood and has developed, as a consequence, a tolerance for discomfort that most of the room could not match. Alistair bore it less gracefully, not visibly. His composure held, as it always held, but internally he was doing something that closely resembled fury, which was not an emotion he had much experience managing. On Sunday morning, Evelina and her mother departed. There was no scene, no confrontation with Pemberton's aunt, who remained at the gathering with the unmoved expression of a woman who has done what she came to do. The Ashcroft carriage was brought round at 9, and Evelina came downstairs with her traveling case, and said her appropriate goodbyes to her host and her fellow guests, and was correct and warm and gave nothing away. She passed Alistair in the entrance hall. She stopped. They were briefly alone in the 2 seconds before her mother descended the stairs. "Don't do anything direct," she said quietly, without looking at him. "It will make it worse." "I know," he said. "All right," she said, even more quietly. "I'll be at Hawthorne until February," he said. She nodded. She moved toward the door. Her mother arrived. They went out to the carriage, and the door closed, and the gravel announced their departure, and the sound of it faded into the Sunday morning and was gone. January was the longest month Alistair could remember. He was at Hawthorne, managing the estate with the methodical attention that his father had never given it, and that he had spent 15 years providing instead. He rode the fields in the cold mornings. He met with tenants. He went through the account books with his solicitor and made the calculations he had been making for 3 years and arrived, as always, at the same gap, the number that stood between the estate's survival and its decline, the number that required a solution he had not yet found. Pemberton's family had money. This was the thing. This was always the thing. He had never formally approached the arrangement, had never put himself in the room where such a discussion would happen, but it had floated at the edge of every social calculation he had made for 2 years. Pemberton, whose family's northern estates were solvent and whose personal income was comfortable, who was pleasant and unambitious and would never make anyone particularly unhappy. The letter that arrived from Evelina in the second week of January was not a love letter. It was a carefully composed account of the situation as she understood it, the Pemberton family's position, her mother's insistence on proceeding, the social consequences of any visible disruption to the engagement. It was written in the voice of a woman who is thinking clearly about an unclear situation and is angry about having to. At the bottom, in the same measured hand, she had written, "I do not want to marry him. I am being very clear about this because I think you should know it, not because I am asking you for anything. I am not asking you for anything. I simply refuse to perform contentment I do not feel in a letter to someone who already knows better." He read this 6 times. He wrote back, "I know you are not asking. I know what that cost you to say. For what it is worth, the situation is not resolved on my side either, and I am working on it. I am asking you to give me time." She wrote back, "You have time. Be careful with it." He put the letter with the others and sat at his desk for a long time. Outside, Hawthorne in January was cold and still, the fields frozen, the trees stripped, the whole estate waiting in the specific patience of land that has survived generations of the people who claim to own it. He thought about what she had said in the garden in December. You should have spoken. In 1876. Before any of this, he had spent 3 years calculating. He had been calculating when he should have been decisive, and the cost of that failure was now a woman he loved writing him careful, restrained letters about an engagement she did not want. He picked up his pen, not to write to her, to write to his solicitor. It was time to stop calculating and start finding another way. February brought sleet and an invitation. The Whitmore household, the Ashcroft family home, was hosting a small dinner in the second week of the month. 20 guests. The invitation, which arrived at Hawthorne with the Ashcroft crest, was signed by Lady Harriet, which meant it was deliberate. He was not sure what Lady Harriet intended. He was not sure he trusted that she intended anything charitable. But Evelina would be there, and he had been corresponding with his solicitor for 3 weeks, and something was beginning to clarify. He accepted. The dinner at Whitmore was nothing like the Ashford gathering. It was a family house, warm, slightly worn at the edges, with the cheerful disorder of a place that is lived in rather than performed. The guests were mostly local, mostly comfortable with each other, and the atmosphere was the relaxed formality of a winter evening among people who had no great performances to give. Pemberton was present. This was, Alistair understood the moment he arrived, the point of the invitation. Lady Harriet had put them all in the same room. Him, Evelina, Pemberton, with 20 witnesses and a dinner table and the social framework that required everyone to behave themselves. Pemberton was exactly as remembered, agreeable, pleasant, unremarkable in the specific way of a man who has never been asked to be remarkable. He greeted Alistair with the easy warmth of someone who had no idea what he was walking into, and shook his hand, and said something about the shooting season, and moved away. Alistair watched him go. He was not a villain. He was simply a man in a situation that no one had fully explained to him, which was its own kind of problem. He found Evelina before dinner, near the fire in the drawing room. "Your mother arranged this," he said. "Yes," she said. She looked calm. She always looked calm. It was one of the things he found most extraordinary about her and most difficult. "She wants you to see us in the same room," he said. "She wants you to see you in the same room," Evelina said. "She thinks the sight of him will resolve your—" I believe her word was impracticality. "And does she know that the sight of him resolves nothing?" Evelina looked at the fire. "She knows," she said quietly, "that I am not happy. She has chosen not to let that change her position." "And what is her position, precisely?" "That the Ashcroft estate needs this alliance. That Pemberton is suitable, and she respects my feelings, but cannot afford to act on them." She paused. "She is not wrong, from a certain angle." "From your angle?" "From my angle," she said. "I am 26 years old, and I am being arranged like furniture, and I am profoundly tired of being told that love is a luxury I have not earned." He looked at her. "Evelina," he said. "Don't," she said, in the same tone she had used in the December library. The tone of a woman protecting herself from a sentence she cannot afford yet. "I am not going to say something impractical," he said. "I am going to say something I should have said 3 years ago." He paused. "I have been working on the estate finances. There is a route, not involving Pemberton's family, not involving anyone's money but my own and a land arrangement I am negotiating, that will resolve the gap." He kept his voice low, private, even in the busy room. "It will take another 4 months. It is not certain yet, but it is real." She looked at him. "What are you saying?" she asked. "I am saying that the calculation that kept me from speaking in 1876 is no longer the calculation," he said. "I am saying I was wrong to let it be the reason. I am saying—" He stopped. He looked at her directly, with the full, unmanaged attention he had been withholding for 4 years. "I am saying that I love you. That I have loved you since the Voss Garden. That I should have said it 3 years ago, and I failed to, and the consequences of that failure have been significant. I know that. The fire moved. Across the room, Pemberton laughed at something someone had said. "I am not asking you to end anything tonight," he said. "I am not asking you to do anything that puts you at risk. I am asking you, only, to give me 4 months. And then I will ask you properly, in a proper situation, with a proper solution in place." She looked at him for a long time. "And if the 4 months don't work?" she asked. "Then I ask you anyway," he said, "and we find another way. Together." "That is not a plan," she said. "That is a feeling." "I know," he said. "I have been ignoring the feeling for 3 years and only trusting the plan. Look where the plan got us." She was very still. Something moved across her face. The same complicated thing he had seen in December, in the morning room, in the library. The thing too layered for a single name. "For months," she said. "For months," he said. She turned away from him to the room. She collected herself in the particular, practiced way. One breath, one small squaring of the shoulders, and then she was simply Lady Evelina Ashcroft again, composed and warm and entirely unreadable. "You should go and talk to Pemberton," she said quietly. "It will look better." He went and talked to Pemberton. He was civil, he was warm, he was everything a man in his position should be, and it cost him approximately everything he had. March arrived with the particular cruelty of a month that promises spring and delivers cold rain and 6 more weeks of winter. The land arrangement was progressing. The solicitor's letters were cautiously optimistic, cautious enough that Alistair read every word of them looking for the precise location of the caution, the specific caveat behind the optimism. He was close. Not there, but close. 3 months, perhaps. Possibly 2. And then, in the 3rd week of March, the letter arrived from Evelina that changed the calculation entirely. It was short. That was the first signal. Her letters were never short. "The announcement has been moved up. Pemberton's family is pressing for a formal date, June, at latest. My mother is in agreement. I have not yet consented to a date, but I do not know how long I can hold the position without explanation. I am not asking you to move faster than is possible. I am asking you to tell me honestly whether I am waiting for something real or something I am imagining. I need to know. Whatever the answer is, I need to know it." He wrote back immediately, that afternoon. He told her it was real. He told her he was 2 months from the arrangement being closed. He told her he needed her to hold. She did not write back for 10 days. When the next letter came, it was from Lady Harriet. Not Evelina. Lady Harriet, in the careful, precise handwriting of a woman who knows exactly what she is doing. "Your Grace, I am writing to you in a capacity that is not entirely conventional, and I hope you will receive this in the spirit in which it is intended. I am aware of the nature of your feeling for my daughter. I have been aware of it longer than she perhaps knows. I want you to understand that what I am about to tell you is given not to harm you, but because I believe Evelina deserves someone with the full information. The Pemberton engagement was not, at its origin, Evelina's choice. I want to be precise about this. Pemberton was introduced to us through an arrangement made between his father and mine, my own father, Lord Hargrove, who remains involved in the Ashcroft estate management. The financial arrangement attached to the engagement was constructed 18 months ago, at Lord Hargrove's insistence, in circumstances that Evelina was not fully informed of at the time. She consented to the engagement believing it to be a mutual choice. She did not know the full shape of what had been arranged around her. I am telling you this because I believe you are in a position, if you choose to act, to change the circumstance. I am not directing you to act. I am giving you the truth and trusting that you will use it correctly. I am also telling you this because my daughter has spent the last 4 years waiting for a man she trusts, and I am tired of watching her wait for something that may or may not arrive. I would like it to arrive. H.A. He read the letter 3 times. The engagement had been manipulated. Lord Hargrove, Harriet's father, a man who had always been at the distant edge of the Ashcroft social landscape. Old money and older connections had arranged it. Not Evelina. Not freely. She had been placed into it by the same kind of calculation that Alistair himself had spent 3 years conducting, by the people above her who had decided that love was a luxury the Ashcroft estate could not afford. He thought of her in the drawing room at Whitmore. I am 26 years old, and I am being arranged like furniture. She had known more than she had said, and less than she deserved to know. He went to his desk. He did not write to his solicitor. He wrote to his land agent. He wrote to his banker. And then he wrote to Lord Hargrove directly. A clear, measured, accurate letter that made 3 things plain: that Alistair was aware of the nature of the Pemberton arrangement, that he was in possession of certain information about its original construction that would be of interest to multiple parties, and that he would welcome a private conversation at the earliest opportunity. He sent it that afternoon. Lord Hargrove's reply arrived in 2 days. It was a single line: Thursday. My club. 3 o'clock. The conversation with Lord Hargrove lasted 40 minutes. Alistair described it afterward to no one, because it was not a scene that needed an audience. What happened in it was this. He told an old man, precisely and without performance, that the arrangement he had constructed around his granddaughter had been built on an incomplete understanding of several things, including but not limited to the condition of the Hawthorne estate, which was considerably closer to solvent than the previous year's figures had suggested, and the degree to which the Pemberton family's northern assets were themselves in a less straightforward position than commonly represented. He said it all quietly, without threat, with the level composure of a man who has finally used his talent for calculation in the right direction. Lord Hargrove was 73 years old and had been in these kinds of rooms since he was 30. He listened. He was silent for a long time. He said, at the end, "What are you proposing?" "That the Pemberton arrangement be released," Alistair said, quietly, "as a mutual decision. No scandal, no disadvantage to the Ashcroft name. In return, I will conclude the land arrangement I have been negotiating through your associate in the Western District, which, as I understand it, has been in your interest for some time." Lord Hargrove looked at him. "And then what?" "And then," Alistair said, "I intend to ask Lady Evelina a question that I should have asked in 1876. What she answers is her own business." Lord Hargrove was quiet for a long moment. He poured 2 glasses of something amber and pushed one across the table. "You took your time," the old man said. "Yes," Alistair said. "I know. The arrangement was released in the first week of April." Quietly. Correctly. Pemberton, when he was told, by his own family, in a conversation Alistair was not present for, accepted it with the ease of a man who had never been deeply invested, which confirmed certain things Alistair had suspected about the degree to which Pemberton himself had been a principal in the arrangement or merely a piece moved by others. The announcement in the social papers was brief and unembroidered. The engagement between Lady Evelina Ashcroft and Viscount Pemberton had been dissolved by mutual agreement. There was no scandal. There was talk. There is always talk. But it moved through the social landscape without sharp edges, because no one had done anything dramatic and Lady Harriet Ashcroft gave it nothing to hold on to. Alistair wrote to Evelina that week. Not the letter he had composed at 2 in the morning in the Ashford Library and never sent. Something simpler. Something that had been reduced, over 4 years, to its necessary truth. The arrangement is released. I want you to know that this came through your mother, through Lord Hargrove, through a conversation that I have been working toward since February. I did not manufacture this. I am telling you the full account because you deserve it, and because I am done making decisions near you without your knowledge. I am going to come to Whitmore on Saturday. I am going to knock on the door and ask if you will walk with me in the garden. That is all I am asking for, a walk. What comes next is your decision, entirely. I have been careful with the time you gave me. I hope it was enough." She wrote back in one sentence, "Saturday is fine." He arrived at Whitmore on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, which was correct, and knocked at the front door, which was answered by a footman who had clearly been informed to expect him, and was shown to the morning room to wait. She came down 5 minutes later. She was in pale gold, the color of early spring, barely there against the gray April morning, and her hair was done with less ceremony than the Ashford gathering, and she looked, as she always looked, exactly like herself. No performance, no social construction, just Evelina, coming into a room where he was waiting, in the house where she had grown up, on a Saturday morning that was still cold enough for breath to cloud. He stood. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. And then, before anything else, "Tell me what happened." "With Lord Hargrove." "All of it," he told her. He stood in the morning room and gave her the full account. The letter from Lady Harriet, the conversation with the old man, the land arrangement, the financial calculation. He did not spare himself any of it. The 3 years of distance, the burned letter, the calculation that had cost them both something they were still, in some small and honest way, paying for. She listened. She did not interrupt. She stood near the window with her arms at her sides and her face carefully composed, and she listened to all of it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You should have told me about the estate," she said. "In 1876, when you were making the calculation." "I know," he said. "I would have understood," she said. "I would not have thought less of you for it." "I know that too," he said. I was proud, and I was afraid, and I convinced myself that silence was protection when it was actually cowardice dressed as discretion." She looked at him. "You told me that," she said, "in December, that you had been less brave than the situation required." "I have been telling myself the truth about it for some time," he said. "I have been slower to tell you." She nodded. She turned to the window. Outside, the Whitmore garden was just beginning to come back. The first green at the edges of the beds, the yews showing new growth, the pale sky above the wall holding something that might, eventually, become sun. "I am going to ask you," she said, not looking at him, "whether what you have done in the last 2 months, the letter to Hargrove, the arrangement, the land deal, whether any of it was done because you thought it was what you were supposed to do, what was required, the correct and socially responsible action." She paused. "Or whether you did it because you wanted to." He came to stand beside her at the window. "I did it," he said, "because the thought of you spending the next 40 years in the wrong life was more than I could sit with any longer." She turned to face him. "That is not a diplomatic answer," she said. "No," he said. "I'm done with diplomatic answers." She looked at him, the full, 4.5 year look, the one that took him apart and put him back together and made no apologies for either operation. "I have been angry with you," she said, "for the last 3 years. For the calculation and the silence and the letters that arrived just late enough to be useless. I know. I am telling you because I am not going to pretend otherwise. I am not going to arrange my feelings tidily to make this easier." "I would not ask you to," he said. "And I want you to know," she said, "that the anger has not changed the other thing. That has been extremely inconvenient. Something in his chest, the part that had been composed for 4 years, that had written and burned and calculated and endured, something in that part released. Not dramatically, quietly, the way tightly held things release when they are finally allowed to." "Evelina," he said. "Ask me," she said. "Whatever it is you have come here to ask. Ask me now, in this room, without the garden walk." "I don't need the garden walk." He looked at her. "Will you marry me?" he said. Not elaborated, not constructed. For years of feeling reduced to its 5 honest words. She was quiet for 3 seconds. "Yes," she said. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. His hand closed around hers. Warm, real, the first time in 4.5 years that they had touched with the full and unmanaged weight of what they were to each other. And neither of them moved. Outside, the Whitmore garden sat in the gray April morning. Inside, the morning room held two people who had taken 4 years too long and done it anyway, which is not the love story of fairy tales, but is, possibly, the only love story worth telling, the one that cost something real, that required people to become more honest than they had been, that arrived not as lightning, but as the slow, exhausted, extraordinary recognition of a truth that was always there. "I should tell you," she said, after a moment, still looking at their hands, "that I am going to be very difficult to be married to." "I know," he said. "I will disagree with you constantly. I am aware of this, yes. And I will want to be consulted about everything. The estate, the finances, every decision of substance. I would not have it otherwise." She looked up at him. "You say that now. I will say it in 20 years, he said. "I suspect I will mean it more." She looked at him for a long moment. And then, for the first time in this entire long and careful and emotionally exhausting story, she smiled. A real smile, unguarded. The smile he had seen exactly twice before and had been trying not to think about ever since. "You should stay for lunch," she said. "I had hoped you would ask," he said. "My mother will have a great deal to say. Lady Harriet and I have reached an understanding," he said. "She will still have a great deal to say." "I know," he said. "I am looking forward to it." She released his hand. She crossed to the door. She paused, hand on the frame, in the way she had always done when she was about to say something that mattered. "Alistair," she said. "Yes." "The next time you are calculating," she said, "and the calculation is telling you to wait, come and talk to me first." He looked at her across the morning room. "Always," he said. She opened the door. She called for the housekeeper to set an additional place for lunch. And then she turned back to him with that unguarded expression, the one that was not performed, not arranged, not managed for anyone's benefit, and said, "It took you long enough." "Yes," he said, and for the first time in 4.5 years, Alistair Hawthorne smiled back at her like a man who has finally stopped being careful. "I know." The morning room was quiet around them. Outside, the Whitmore garden continued its slow return to life, and the gray April sky held its cautious, non-committal promise of something warmer. And somewhere in the house, Lady Harriet Ashcroft heard the housekeeper being called about an extra place for lunch, and set down her tea and allowed herself, very privately, one small and satisfied smile. Some stories find their way through. It takes longer than it should, and costs more than it ought, and requires everyone involved to become more honest than they had planned. But they find their way. This one had. The end.